Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the State of Parcel Shipping. I'm Rob Martinez, co-founder of Shipware and the moderator of today's session. It's my pleasure to be here today. If you're not familiar with Shipware, we're a parcel logistics consultancy and tech firm specializing in parcel, LTL, and 3PL analysis, pricing, and procurement. We employ former carrier executives, and we have representatives from all major national carriers. Some of them are joining us today, including Josh Taylor. Hi, Josh. Josh is Shipware's Senior Director of Professional Services, our consulting and analytics arm. Prior to joining us at Shipware, Josh was with UPS for over 17 years, including leadership roles in UPS's pricing, revenue management, and global product innovations departments. Adi Karamcheti is a senior consultant also on the professional services team. Adi comes to Shipware after an 18-year career with FedEx, where he split his time between revenue management and sales. Adi specialized in quantitative pricing analysis and contributing to the global pricing strategy at FedEx. And rounding out our perspective on national carriers is Gordon Glazer. Hi, Gordon. Gordon is Shipware's USPS specialist with over 34 years of postal and small pack industry experience, specializing in analysis, market trends, and modal optimization, which we define as the tactical movement of freight between service types and multiple carriers, from national carriers to the United States Postal Service and regional carriers. I myself have been in the parcel space for well over 30 years. And I've never come across a period in the industry as unique as the past few years, culminating to a boiling point as we approach the end of the Teamsters UPS contract, with both sides still sidelined from the bargaining table. The current state of the parcel industry is dynamic, to say the least, with new market entrants in parcel delivery, complex and expensive carrier pricing, and new models of distribution management, including ship from store, as well as multi-carrier enablement. So while there's a lot to be optimistic about, there's also a lot to be anxious about, which is why I'm sure so many of you have joined us today. We received dozens of questions from webinar registrants ahead of time when you registered for today's webinar, and we'll address as many as we can, either directly or indirectly, but you can also submit additional questions throughout the session by clicking the Q&A button in the controls. Almost all of the questions we received were related to the potential for a Teamsters strike. So while our panelists will cover the general state of UPS, FedEx, and the Postal Service, most of our discussion today will revolve around the potential work stoppage based on those pre-submitted questions. So before we hear from our panelists, we want to hear from you. I'd like to take a quick poll of our audience member. The first poll is we want to just understand demographics a little bit. So is UPS your primary carrier? Go ahead and answer yes or no. Click on the screen where appropriate.
This is all anonymous, by the way, right, Rob?
It is anonymous, and we're going to move on to the second question, and then at a certain point, we're going to share the results that'll pop up in real time here. So question number 2, have you diverted freight or are in the process of diverting freight away from UPS? Yes or no? Question number 3, which carriers have you diverted freight to? This is a multiple choice opportunity. Feel free to click all that apply. FedEx, Postal Service, DHL, regionals. I think there's a couple more in here. Question number 4, what percentage of freight would you estimate you've diverted away from UPS already? First option is none. Second option is a third, 2/3, or 3/4. And then finally, 100% has moved away from UPS because we're afraid of them striking. And question number 5 is our last one. Once the strike threat or the strike action is over, how much of the diverted freight will stay with the diverted carrier? Let me explain that. A little wordy. So if you've moved business away from UPS to alternative carriers, once the UPS strike has been settled or the labor contract has been settled, do you intend to stay with that carrier or do you intend to switch it back to UPS? So if you answer none, you don't intend to switch any business back to UPS, and then you can see the other options. Okay, and we'll share those responses either as a follow-up or at the end of today's session. But let's move on to the panelists. And Josh, I'm going to start with you, since so many questions are concerning UPS and the potential for a Teamsters strike in a week and a half. I want to start with you. So Sean O'Brien, the IBT president, has announced there have been many improvements for the Teamsters members, with 60 or so tentative agreements already settled, which is the most ever changes in a contract. So what are some of those union gains thus far?
Well, a lot of the really, really big ones have already been, they've reached a tentative agreement on them. You know, one of the things that was a big part of what got Sean O'Brien elected was eliminating the 22-4 driver, that second tier of UPS driver that was introduced in the last contract. People might remember that the majority of voters, Teamsters voters, actually turned that down, but they didn't have enough Teamsters voters for it to actually be final. So Teamsters have never liked this. It's been a big issue. So the fact that they've reached tentative agreement here, I see as huge. You know, they've also done some high visibility things, like promise to add air conditioning to the trucks, adding fans in the meantime, things like that. And also gotten Martin Luther King Day as a holiday. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like UPS has given in quite a bit already, and that the union members would want to implement those gains ASAP. And UPS is quick to announce that these contract gains are on the back of what was already what they call industry-leading pay. So where are they still far apart?
The biggest piece that we're missing so far is part-time wages. And this story goes back decades. You know, when I started at UPS in 2003, I started at $8.50 an hour. People who started in 1982 were making $8. So the wage increases have really been slow over time. Now they've picked up recently. I think most average around $13 an hour to start. And the average part-timer is paid $20 an hour, plus they get full benefits eventually. But the path to those benefits have also gotten longer. So they have lost things over time, and it definitely hasn't kept up with inflation. So that's the one where UPS has been hesitant to make a move. That's the biggest one that I see as.
I see. But while they've been both sides have been somewhat public in the media, I don't have any details on what they're actually asking for, what the Teamsters were asking in terms of starting part-time compensation compared to what the company has offered. Do you have any insight there?
No, unfortunately, both sides have kept quiet. So, you know, we can speculate on what we think they're asking for, but ultimately, you know, when you think about, you know, California's starting wage is above $13 an hour. And, you know, Amazon very publicly pays $15 an hour or more. So in order to compete for these people to staff their warehouses, it does need to be a competitive offer.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. So Forbes and Reuters and others have reported that as little as a 10-day walkout could cost UPS as much as $7 billion. How much business do you estimate UPS has already lost, if any? And if the Teamsters walk out, how will that contribute to lost business now and into the immediate future?
So this whole year, let me speak specifically to Shipware accounts. Now we have almost $2 billion that we work with. So it's a lot of spend, but it's certainly not the whole industry. But in our experience, the first half of this year, if any of our clients switched carriers, it was from UPS to FedEx, not the other way around. And UPS struggled to retain a lot of their own accounts. So it was a pretty substantial shift for us. Now, in their last earnings call, FedEx said that they haven't seen a material difference from the strike yet. And I'm wondering if that's maybe a mixture of volume being down at existing accounts and then new accounts coming on, like the ones that we are seeing, and that kind of balancing out. We are seeing now in the last 2 weeks before the strike, there are a lot of people that are scrambling, trying to find places to ship their packages if UPS does go on strike. And those competitors of UPS are largely requiring minimum commitments for extended periods of time. On the short end, 6 months. On the longer side, 3 years, with large penalties if you divert again. So there are some risks there, some serious risks to UPS losing business. And then some of what they've agreed to, like changes to Smart or SurePost, the resulting wage increases that UPS will most likely try and pass on to their shippers, those are all reasons that UPS might continue to lose business even after they resolve the strike.
So with so many tentative agreements already reached, it sounds like we're down to the final economic ones. UPS has said it didn't walk away from the negotiating table. The Teamsters are saying that the company categorically did in the wee hours of the morning on July 5th, when they essentially said there's nothing left to give. Who's right and who's at fault here?
Well, I think both sides are doing a pretty good job of negotiating through the media, right? They're trying to project a certain approach to these negotiations. Sean O'Brien is really playing it up for his team, right? He needs to be viewed as the strong man here who is getting the best possible agreement for his members. And this helps him out not only with UPS, but also if he is viewed as having a really strong win here, it helps him as they're trying to unionize Amazon or FedEx as their networks consolidate. So drawing out this storyline really makes a lot of sense for him. Coincidentally, while it is hard for UPS customers, it could help UPS in the long run as well, because if the Teamsters have an easier time unionizing those other carriers, that puts UPS in a more competitive position. So there's not really a black and white, a right and wrong. The two sides have a lot that they are both hoping to achieve here.
It sounds like some posturing, but in my experience, most negotiations involve give and take. Do you feel that the Teamsters have demonstrated inflexibility, perhaps, kind of a take it or leave it sort of attitude? And if so, do they have an obligation to be more willing to negotiate to get UPS back to the bargaining table?
That is what they've projected. They've said that, we've gotten these 60 plus concessions and we haven't given an inch. So, if that's really the case, then yeah, that doesn't sound like a very mutually beneficial negotiation process. I don't know. I wouldn't assume that is actually the case. I think that's more the talk track. So like you said, they have gotten so many concessions. They are so close. Both sides say 95% of the way there. So we're closing in on a deal, I think.
Yeah. Well, so if they do strike, the union has talked about having a war chest, but some of the numbers I've seen are, 340 million in a war chest, and there's other union action taking place. With 340,000 union members, that's only $1,000 per head. How long can they withstand a strike?
I hope the individual union members have savings, because that is, far below what they're used to being paid. They have about 340,000 members. So like you said, so $1,000 each. Granted, a higher percentage of that is going to go to drivers. Part-timers will get a smaller percentage of that. But after a couple of weeks, if you don't have your own strike fund to draw on, you're going to be tough. It's going to be tough for you.
Yeah,
you have to buy food,
especially with the union recent changes where they eliminated the 8-day waiting period, so members could get paid on day one, 5 times the rate of their dues rate with a minimum of $200. So let's switch over to the company. Let's switch to UPS. They not so subtly announced strike contingency training. Can UPS sustain operations with non-union employees and strike breakers?
Only to a very limited extent. The pilots have said that they won't cross, the picket line, so they won't be able to fly planes. Or if they do, it'll be bringing in a third party to try and fly them for them, which is going to be a difficult experience there too. There are not nearly as many management employees as there are union employees. They're not trained in the hubs. So, they will be able to move, hopefully the most important packages through the ground network, but nobody should expect to continue to send more than probably 10% of their normal shipping with UPS and have it arrive, and it'll probably arrive late.
Josh, if there's no resolution as we approach this July 31st deadline, I know O'Brien is asked Biden to not step in, but do you think the White House gets involved?
This is a question that I've gone back and forth on over the months. At this point in time, I don't think he does. He did step in for the rail workers, right? And that was a big surprise for people. He billed himself as the most union-friendly president in decades. So once is an exception. Stepping in twice, that starts to become a policy. And, the Democrats want to get elected again the next cycle. I think that reduces the chance that Biden steps in here.
Okay, interesting. So if a tentative agreement is forged prior to the deadline, does that require a ratification process? And if so, what is that timeline?
It does require ratification, but if they have an agreement that the negotiating committee has agreed on, they can avert the strike. So the members don't have to all agree to it yet, which is the good news, right? If the negotiating committee works with UPS, they reach an agreement, they recommend that the union members vote on this, they'll be fine.
So I know it's coming on the heels of record profits at UPS, but a lot of concessions are being granted already and more to come before they reach an agreement. But when they do, we know UPS's costs are going to increase significantly. So 2 questions for you, Josh. How will the Teamsters concessions impact UPS's pricing? And how soon will shippers see an increase? That's question 1. And question 2 is, do you think FedEx would raise pricing to stay in step or discount further and potentially try to capitalize on new business growth?
All right, so the first question, yes, UPS will raise rates. They don't want to sacrifice margin as a result of this change. There are certain services that I think will get hit harder than others. SurePost in particular, with the, UPS agreed to allow the Teamsters to deliver a higher percentage of it. That service in particular is one of convenience. So it's a slightly lower cost ground, slightly slower, but there are competitive alternatives out there that are much faster and cheaper. So as soon as people become frustrated with that and they start looking seriously elsewhere, that business could easily go. But overall, I would expect a big rate increase coming into 2024. And probably the bad news for shippers is that given the way UPS and FedEx are so dominant in the market, there's really no benefit to FedEx of not following. There's simply too much profit for no extra work to justify not following.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And so you think start of 2024 would be your guess, or is there going to be a mid-year rate action to shore up profitability sooner?
Well, peak season surcharges, a lot of those have become permanent year round now, but, I think they have a natural point there where they might raise some rates just through surcharges, things like that. But no, I don't expect them to make immediate adjustments to their general rate and service.
Okay, good. Last question for you, Josh. So volume has been down for both FedEx and UPS all year long, but these 2 competitors are public companies. They've emphasized revenue quality over low margin volume growth. So will both carriers continue to focus on yield over volume growth, or how do you see the paradigm changing over the next year or so?
I think both of them now have experienced enough volume loss that it's starting to spook investors. So earlier this year, late last year, we saw FedEx start to be more aggressive with their incentives, start to offer lower rates. UPS hadn't followed, but that's changed recently, just over the last month. And I know we have somebody asking a question here, UPS told them to wait on negotiating. And that was really our expectation as well. But over the last month and a half, UPS has really stepped up and started to compete with FedEx again. So I don't know about the timing of that. It's a little suspect in my mind, but yeah, I think we will see some more aggressive rate offerings coming once the strike gets resolved.
Thank you, Josh. Very insightful, and I hope helpful to our audience members. Let's transition over to Audie to discuss what FedEx is doing in light of all this. Hi, Audie.
Hey, Rob.
So in the event of a labor disruption at UPS, how much of UPS's volume can FedEx And other carriers like the United States Postal Service or regional parcel carriers or package aggregators, how much can they handle?
They can take a lot of it, and they can't take all of it, though. And I think that's the bottom line. And FedEx, for their part, they've communicated to the market consistently. Every time this labor agreement has come up for negotiation, anytime there's any thought of a strike being possible over the last 20, 30 years, FedEx has generally said, listen, we can't take all of their volume and we're not going to try. What I think you're going to see is FedEx has said they're going to prioritize their existing customers. What that tells me is they're going to continue trying to pick those customers up, and those same customers who are splitting business with FedEx, between FedEx and UPS, they're going to take that UPS volume. That's what they're going to want. They're already at those locations. It makes the most sense for FedEx to do that. What you're going to do if you don't have any capacity or volume with FedEx now, it is more problematic. That's one of those places where FedEx is not going to provide a lot of support. If there's whatever additional capacity they have, again, I think they're going to dedicate to their existing shippers.
Well, it's a good transition point because FedEx was very public in establishing that this week, the week of July 17th, was critical for those UPS customers that wanted to divert business away from UPS to FedEx. And they were going to base the volumes that they got this week on future volume allocations. So what specifically did FedEx say? And how has that played out in actual business gains? And what are your customers doing?
So we've heard FedEx use a couple of different dates. The original date is when we first started having more and more serious talk about a UPS strike was March 31st. You got to tell us capacity. You got to sign an agreement. You've got to start shipping with us by this date. That date came and went, and they continued trying to negotiate with customers who are UPS. Now, this date of July 17th seems like it's a little more serious. We're 2 weeks away from a strike. At this point, I have a customer right now. They have an agreement. They were told July 17th, but they were told sign this agreement by July 17th, and we'll give you capacity effective August 1st. So I think there's a little bit of flexibility around that number, but the reality is FedEx wants to start bringing this on as soon as possible. Waiting until August 1st is somewhat problematic because you're going to expect a wave. They're going to have to start making adjustments. They've got to get a good idea of how much potential volume they're going to get. One of the things you want to do is have conversations, and ideally you would have already had these with FedEx representatives about capacity, about space, about pricing agreements. Good thing to do is to talk to someone like Shipware. We can help you with this. There's a lot of guidance that you may need. There's a lot of variability here as well.
And Josh, what are they telling customers? Are non-customers, I guess, UPS customers, are they saying we can take 10% of your freight, half of your freight, 100%, or is it all over the board?
Was that directed at me or at Audie? You said my name.
Oh, sorry, Josh. Yeah, it's directed at Audie. Let's stay with Audie.
They aren't giving specific numbers, and that's one of the things that I think is tricky. If you're splitting volume right now between FedEx and UPS, and let's say you have 100 packages, 50 go FedEx, 50 go UPS, FedEx hasn't told you we'll take the other 50. We'll take 100% of it. What the question that really is, the real world question is, what happens day one of a strike and you put 100 FedEx labels on your 100 boxes? Does that FedEx driver take them or doesn't he? It's hard to see him being able to take all of them. Maybe at the beginning of the day, beginning of his route, he could. As he goes through his route, that truck's going to be full. What is the practical ability to do that? And so I think there's a real question as to how they're going to handle it. And that also leads back to, if you're exclusively with UPS, it seems highly unlikely that FedEx is going to be able to add you to their pickup list, at least until that part is sorted out. But as far as specific numbers, short of signing with them early, they aren't telling you what percent they'll take. It is going to be something like a case-by-case basis, and it's going to be station and terminal specific. There's going to be more capacity in certain parts of the country than others.
What a nightmare. Let's hope UPS and Teamsters return to the bargaining table soon. Let me ask you this. Relative to those customers that FedEx has said, we will take on some of your freight, are they demanding long-term, contract commitments?
We are seeing some of that, Rob. And I think, again, customer now, we're talking with them. They have essentially a step-down penalty language in their agreements. Year one is when the penalty is most severe. It drops in year two, and then in year three, it goes away. And what that tells us is this has been a FedEx concern all along, is that a strike occurs, they'll get volume, strike ends, and everybody just switches right back to UPS. So FedEx, to prevent that from occurring, and there is some expense for FedEx to bring all this volume on initially. That does cost them adjusting routes, making changes, et cetera, within their network. And then for it to only go away 2 weeks later does them no good. So one of the things they're going to do is try and put that penalty language in place. That is something that's negotiable. There is some question as to how enforceable it would be depending on what FedEx is going to want to do after that. Again, it's a conversation you have to have, but if I were FedEx, that is something I would want to leverage if I could.
And what specifically has that looked like? I mean, is that a multi-year agreement with step downs or a percentage or a flat penalty for breaking or what?
Yeah, in the case of this customer, it is a step down, multi-year, 3-year deal. $300,000 is the penalty if you break the agreement in year 1. It drops down to $200,000 in year 2, and then $100,000 in year 3, when, of course, you would be able to renegotiate once that agreement is at the end.
So the other thing, Adi, that FedEx said was any floating pricing proposals that hadn't been accepted prior to July 17th were going to be invalid. So for those that didn't come to terms with FedEx, do you think FedEx will still provide on-demand pickups if UPS goes on strike?
I think they're going to try, but I think the reality is capacity day one is going to be a real question. What does this look like on August 1st? And it could very quickly spiral out of control, where the first thing that's going to go is an on-demand pickup. If you have an existing pickup, they're going to try and honor those first. That's where the volume is anyway. So from a FedEx point of view, that's where they have to focus. If you're calling in and trying to get a pickup, if it's a 12 o'clock pickup and they've got somebody available, yeah, you might be able to get that. You're not going to get a pickup at 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening. That's not going to happen. And so I think one of the things you're going to see is, what are people going to do there? They're going to try and drop off. They're going to go to a FedEx office. They're going to go to a Walgreens. These locations are also going to be overwhelmed because they're going to be what everybody else is doing. So again, trying to get your volume into those networks, it's going to be somewhat problematic. I'll be curious to see how FedEx handles those drop-off locations and those partnerships they have with entities like Walgreens. How much are they actually going to be able to take from them?
And let's talk about service performance if they do. I mean, one of our attendees observed that FedEx didn't adjust well to the influx in shipping volume during the COVID era. So how do you think FedEx would fare if UPS does strike and their networks are diluted with freight?
I think they'll do a good job weathering the storm. And I think one of the big differences between this and COVID is FedEx has had time to prepare for this. And they've been communicating the same message over and over again: our customers first. So if that's the case, really it's the message to their customers is, we're going to take what you've always given us and the additional volume you have, we're going to try and help you as best we can, but we may not be able to take all of it. So they've been communicating this for months and months and months. So I think they've done a fairly good job setting expectations around what their performance will be. I do expect declines in service, but then again, the market expectation is probably going to go down some with all of these additional packages in their network. I don't think it's going to be fair for people to assume the same delivery times when both of the dominant carriers are operating at full capacity. So I think, again, FedEx will weather the storm. The bigger question is if this goes longer, and going back to the point Josh brought up earlier about the drivers and the members of the Teamsters having to weather the storm, if it goes more than a week or two, that's the same thing for FedEx. If this goes beyond a couple of weeks, then it becomes more and more of a challenge moving forward.
Adi, here's a UPS question. I'm going to direct it to you because I know you're also a UPS expert. But one of our attendees has seen increased delays with UPS lately. He wants to know if these delays are related to the Teamsters negotiations somehow, and he wants to know if it's risky to be shipping with UPS in the next couple of weeks.
You know, we're not seeing, with the customers we work with, Rob, broad delays on the UPS pickups and deliveries. The Teamsters have a contract that ends July 31st. And from what we see, they're doing their usual excellent job. So no, I don't really see a lot of risk in shipping with UPS prior to the strike date. What I would just make sure of is the delivery date is July 31st or earlier.
That makes sense. So speaking of service performance, you know, the carriers have been known over the years of putting their money where their mouth is, having money back guarantees on all products. That went away during COVID, and some of it came back post-COVID. But ground delivery still is not guaranteed. So maybe you could describe what the money back guarantees are today with FedEx and UPS, and Do you think those will be taken off the table in the event of a UPS strike?
You know, the FedEx, the money back guarantee, it's funny because you go back to FedEx, that's how FedEx made its name in the business. We're going to deliver this package by this time of day. And then several years back, I remember when I first started in the pricing department there, they told us, okay, we're going to start, anybody who gets a custom FedEx pricing agreement is going to have the money back guarantee removed for air and ground shipments. And we weren't telling sales that, we were just putting it in the agreements. So that is something that has evolved, and they're moving away from money back guarantee. I think even Carol Tomei said, something to the effect of, we don't really need, we're delivering these things on time anyway. We don't need to give you a guarantee. And so with that in mind, these guarantees apply currently only to their next day air services domestically and to some of their international services. They do not apply to ground, as you mentioned. I would think there is a high possibility that they will remove these in the case of a strike. They're almost going to have to, and they don't necessarily need to provide it because they're going to be the only ones offering this service to a large portion of the UPS customer base. So they don't have to guarantee it. They're the only ones who are going to be picking up and delivering. And at least from a FedEx point of view, why offer this money back guarantee when the expectation on the delivery time is going to have dropped? But that said, they haven't announced that they're going to do that. I think they're waiting to see if there's a strike. They don't have to announce that until there is a strike.
Makes sense. Yeah. So, Audie, before we leave you, I know we've mostly been discussing FedEx relative to the UPS strike, but a lot is going on at FedEx. New CFO announced this past week, their new Drive initiative. Any last comments about FedEx before we move on?
I think the Drive program is particularly important, and there is a lot going on at FedEx. There's a lot of dramatic change happening there. But since they acquired RPS back in 1998, they've maintained two separate pickup and delivery systems: the ground network and an express network, an air network. It's been a sore spot for a lot of customers. You have to segregate your packages, air packages here, ground packages here, two different pickup times. It is complicated, and it's a disincentive to ship with FedEx. It's easier to go to with UPS, and one guy will pick up all your stuff. Now they're going to move towards a model where there's one driver. That is a significant advantage, and that's going to be a huge plus for their sales force when they go out and try and sell their services. Now, the question becomes, will the cost reductions from consolidating these stations and terminals that is also part of the Drive program impact service levels in such a way that it comes out as more of a negative than a positive? I don't think so. I think this is something customers are hankering for and are going to be eager to benefit from. However, in the short term with a strike, I don't think that's very much top of mind for anyone.
Audie, thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Now let's loop in our postal expert, Gordon Glazer. Gordon, what is the state of the union at the Postal Service?
Well, thank you, Rob. First of all, the Postal Service is not a union. Well, they have unions, but there's currently no labor issues going on like there are, seems like everywhere else. There's so much going on in the news. Before I get to that, though, I did want to do a little housekeeping. The poll, I know we had some issues with the poll. We were able to restart that. So if you haven't answered the poll questions, please look at that. We've had 57 of our 120 plus attendees completed that so far. So please take a look at that. In terms of the post office, this is an amazing opportunity, Rob. It hasn't happened since 1997, since the last strike when the Teamsters went out. And, they were about half the size then, and the market was very different, right? We had Roadway, was delivering packages in Space Age. And I remember all the chaos back then. And, the post office back then became the carrier of last resort because they did not have the ability to restrict volume. And so they ended up, they were the ones that, where everybody else cut them off, and everybody else did, unless they were going to give them long-term volume. That's how everybody did it then. That's how they're doing it today. It's going to be the same thing. The post office is going to be, if it happens, they're going to be the carrier of last resort, but they're preparing for it. They have extra capacity. They claim that they're going to rise to the occasion. They are licking their chops right now. I know internally, they are crossing their fingers and hoping for a strike, because it will be amazing for them, because it will introduce the post office services to so many people that frankly may not be too familiar with them, or just have had opinions that they're not very good. And the other things is that, the post office is not the same post office from 1997.
Yeah.
Back then, priority mail, businesses got introduced to it and they were blown away by how quickly packages could get across the country for $5 or $6 back in the day. Well, today, priority mail has a guaranteed, not a guarantee, but a day definite delivery. They didn't have it back then. It was arranged. They didn't have insurance back then. Now they offer $100. They didn't have very good tracking. And now it's very, very good tracking on par with the national. So it's and they rebranded a lot of things. Priority mail, even Express got rebranded because of the success from that 1997 strike. Now, fast forward to today, and we have Ground Advantage that got launched this month, right? So that is an ounce-based service up to 70 pounds that can go, like ground and home delivery with a 2 to 5 day delivery standard. That's a beautiful thing. They also have volumetric options that the other carriers don't necessarily have. So 2 different ways to get ounce-based products, either ground or express or faster service with priority mail. So a lot of options. There's also a lot that the consolidators and others in the industry will leverage the post office. And so the post office may not get the pickup, sortation, and transportation, but they get the final mile delivery. And frankly, it's a good point we should make sure everybody understands, is that if the post office gets inundated, if you can avoid those large transportation centers by inducting deep into the postal network, you'll avoid that. And your clients will get a better delivery experience. So the consolidators out there and a lot of the alternative carriers, that a lot of them also will hand off to the post office for that final mile.
Well, I know you do a lot of work in that area, Gordon. Who are some of the consolidators, and what are some of the advantages and disadvantages? And also, how does the pricing compare?
Well, the pricing generally has to be better. The post office's pricing is published, so it's pretty easy target for them to go after. But it's important for shippers to understand is that they really need to understand their distribution patterns and what their profile looks like compared to all the other alternative carriers, because they're all different. They all utilize the work share incentives and postal service if they are using the postal service differently. Some will utilize the priority mail network, some will induct deep, like DHL and OSM. Some of these guys are very deep into the final mile network. In terms of other carriers out there, I'll throw out a few names, Rob. Smart Cargo, ClearJet, Viho, Better Trucks, Parcel, Landmark Global, GLS. We recently announced a national expansion. On Track, which did their national expansion with LaserShip earlier this year. OSM announced today some major enhancements to their distribution centers throughout the United States. DHL has been one of the leaders in the space for a long time now, and we shouldn't forget Pitney Bowes and their logistics with Nugistics that they brought on board.
That's super helpful. I want to switch back to the topic at hand with the strike, and you mentioned the Postal Service being a carrier of last resort, and you said that they can't turn away business. Why is that? And do you think they are a viable option in the event of a strike at UPS?
Oh, absolutely. Let me answer the last one. Yes, I think the post office is a very viable option, and I think a lot of businesses underestimate, really how well the post office can deliver for them. And I think the post office should be part of every carrier mix going forward. And I'm having a senior moment. Rob, what was the beginning of your question? Sorry.
Why are they the carrier of last resort, and why can they not divert freight? Services mandate. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're quasi-government, right? So they were set up by an act of Congress in 1960 something. They became a quasi-agency. In 2006, they split between the market dominant and the competitive side. But they still, they're at every door every day. They do not have an ability to not take volume from the American public. They treat every delivery address as a delivery point. They don't distinguish between commercial addresses and residential, for example. So it's just a delivery point, whereas the other guys charge all these extra fees. And, that's just a good point, is that the post office doesn't charge all those accessorial fees. They're a lot easier to work with. But they don't have a customer service department like the other guys. But then again, they don't need it, because they don't have 100 different ways that they bill you after the fact. They don't. They bill you up front, you pay for it, and they deliver it. It's a very simple service. So it's a different model, but one that shippers should make part of their carrier mix, especially, I mean, this is besides a strike. They are the ones to use if it's 1 pound or other, typically, either them or a consolidator. They're the best bet for US territories, which are treated domestically, PO boxes, Alaska and Hawaii, free Saturday delivery, no extra charges for Saturday delivery. So a lot of good reasons to use the post office.
Lots of advantages. But if they can't turn away volume, what's your best guess on how a UPS strike would impact service performance at the United States Postal Service?
It's going to choke them down a little bit, but keep in mind that last time that it happened, first class mail flew, but for the last 2 years, first class has been diverted to ground, and it's all using post office resources. So we're not going to get choked on the planes. And it's going to be an issue because I don't know if you know, but announced today, the UPS pilots announced that they are not going to cross the Teamsters, right? So we were thinking that UPS Express services might continue to run, but not the case. So Express is, you know, and the post office is going to be one of those that is going to pick up some of that folks that don't have a relationship with FedEx, they can't divert the volume.
Gordon, let's transition a little bit to regionals and package consolidators.
Yes, sir.
So are they saying they're still open to take potential volume away from UPS? And you know, what kind of pricing are they offering, and are they doing so without contractual commitments?
I don't think, no, they are going to have contractual commitments. Their goal is to get long-term clients. They're absolutely going to jump through hoops to try and get people on board as quickly as possible because they want to showcase their services. Yeah, you know, you're going to sign a contract. There's not a lot of teeth in those contracts. Yeah, you could probably back out of them, but they're going to show you amazing service at a lower price point. And frankly, you know, most companies are going to want to stay because they're going to get good service, and they're going to get at a lower price point, and they're going to have more redundancy in their carrier mix going forward, which is going to help them as they go into the busy Q4 season.
So if you're a UPS customer and you haven't yet negotiated pricing and volume allocations with an alternative carrier or carriers, is it too late? And how would you advise shippers in those circumstances?
Ooh, well, I would talk to a consultant, frankly, somebody. They can help you find the best mix so that you're not, you know, there's 30 options out there. You're out of time, man. You need to press the easy button. So, you know, let's get involved. There's some package carrier programs that you can sign up with very quickly that the consultants know about. I think they're going to be your best bet. So
I want to go back really quickly to the poll that has been answered here. It looks like the vast majority on today's call are shippers. So 84% are shippers. Question number 2, is UPS your primary? Split right down the middle there, 50-50. Have you diverted freight or in the process of diverting freight away from UPS? UPS shareholders and company executives would be loathful to hear that 54% of you are or in the process of doing so or have already done so. And, you know, where are you diverting that freight to? Question number 4. Most of you are moving to FedEx, 75% with, and this was a multiple choice one, but a third of you are looking at the Postal Service, and then 13% DHL e-commerce, and then another 30% with regionals. And what percentage of freight would you estimate you've diverted away? So for many of you, none. But it looks like the vast majority, only a little bit, about a third of your volume has been diverted. And then number 6, once the strike threat or strike action is over, how much diverted freight will stay with the diverted carrier? And so many of you haven't diverted freight. And then most of you are indicating only a little bit will stay diverted. And do you believe the Teamsters will go on strike? 50-50 split. And so, you know, I know there's a split on this panel as well. We've talked about it internally here at Shipware for months now. But the multi-million-dollar question I have for each of you, and I'll start with you, Josh. Same question for each of you is, will UPS and the Teamsters return to the negotiating table to reach a tentative agreement, you know, that needs to be ratified prior to this July 31st deadline, or are you forecasting a labor disruption? Josh, you first.
They will reach an agreement. Strike will be averted. There's too much on the line for both sides, and yeah, just maybe 25% chance, which is significantly higher than any year since '97, but I think they work it out.
Great. I concur. That's my sentiment exactly. Let's move over to Gordon.
Well, me and Rob have had a bet, but I went on went on early and said that I believe that they would go on strike because, you know, the threat of a strike and crying wolf for too long, it just doesn't become believable. However, I think the big tell is what's going to happen in the positioning for future Amazon strike. And I think the Teamsters are going to win either way. And I think it's going to happen in the final minutes, the final hour. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to double down and say that the Teamsters are going to hold out and they're going to strike because it's not going to cost them anything for the first 4 days.
Okay. All right. And Adi, what say you?
Yeah, I'm with Gordon on this one. I think they are going to strike. I think there are a unique set of factors right now that sort of indicate strike possibility is higher than it's ever been. And so I do think they're going to strike.
So our internal group here matches the national poll that we just conducted with our audience today. Very insightful, gents. That concludes today's session. A recording of the call will be posted to Shipware's LinkedIn page. If you don't mind displaying the QR code up there on the screen, Adi, that'd be helpful. And to our audience, if you need help, there are a lot of resources out there to help you here at Shipware and also elsewhere in the marketplace. But I thank you for your participation, and I wish each of you the best of luck over the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.